The dust was still settling on Ember Ridge when an old man stepped into the ring, a man thought to be dead for 25 years. The stallion no one could tame stood frozen, not in fear, but in recognition. What secret did they share? And why did his return shake the town to its core? If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The midday sun hung low and mean over Ember Ridge Ranch, scorching the earth into dry, cracked lines. Dust swirled lazily in the still air, stirred only by the restless pacing of the wild stallion inside the corral. His coat shimmered like smoke, dark with streaks of silver, and his eyes held a fury that made grown men step back without shame. They called him Ember. Some said he was cursed. Others swore he was born from the fire that had torn through the old Graves Ranch 25 years ago. No one had ridden him, not once, not even for 10 seconds. Cowboys tried. All of them failed. Some left with broken ribs, others with broken pride. On the ranch's bleached bleachers, a small crowd sat, hats pulled low, boots tapping nervously. At the top sat Cassidy Hayes, the owner of Ember Ridge, leaning back with a smirk stretched across his tanned face. He sipped from a silver flask and pointed down toward the corral like a man watching a circus act. 100,000, he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. 10 minutes on that horse and the money's yours if you can survive it. Laughter trickled from the onlookers, dry and uncomfortable. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. That was, until an old man stepped through the far gate. His boots scraped through the dust. His jeans were faded, his shirt wrinkled and worn. A wide-brimmed hat shaded a face weathered by time. His walk was slow but steady, like each step carried a story. Someone in the crowd gasped. Is that? No, it can't be. Marlon Graves. The name rolled through the bleachers like thunder. Once, long ago, he had been the best horseman in the valley. They said he could speak to horses without words, but he'd vanished after the fire that destroyed his ranch. No one had seen him since. Most believed he'd died in the flames with the rest of the Graves legacy. Now here he was, walking straight toward the stallion they said no man could tame. Hayes stood, squinting hard. I'll be damned, he muttered. The ghost himself. No, one spoke as Marlon approached the corral. Even Ember, wild and untouchable, had stopped pacing. He stood still, watching the old man with careful eyes like he remembered something no one else did. A girl near the fence, small, freckled, with 2 loose braids, clutched her mother's hand. Mama, she whispered. That horse knows. Him. Her name was Emmy Hartwell, and though only 10 years old, she could see things that most adults missed. She didn't know Marlon. Not really. But her grandmother had once told her bedtime stories about the man who could whisper to animals, and who vanished like smoke. Marlon stopped a few feet from the gate, hands at his sides. No rope, no saddle, no tools, just presence. Ember didn't bolt. He didn't rear. Instead, he let out a deep breath, one that seemed to carry years of pain and memory. Then, Marlon stepped forward. The crowd held its breath. Marlon raised one weathered hand. It shook slightly, not with fear but with something older. Grief, maybe, or something deeper. Ember stayed still. And then, slowly, he took one step forward, then another. Gasps echoed through the bleachers. Hayes's smile vanished. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed. What the hell is this? Marlon moved closer, stopping just inches from the great beast. Their eyes locked. The corral might as well have vanished. It was just the 2 of them now, in the silence of the dust and sun. With a whisper only the horse could hear, Marlon said, something soft. Ember lowered his head, not in fear, but in respect. The little girl squeezed her mother's hand tighter. Mama, he's not trying to ride him, she said. He's remembering. From the far side, Cassidy Hayes barked, This ain't a museum show, you gonna ride or not? Marlon didn't answer. He turned, calm and quiet, and walked toward the saddle hanging on the fence. With care, he lifted it and placed it gently on Ember's back. The stallion didn't flinch. Marlin adjusted the straps like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The crowd didn't cheer. They barely moved. It wasn't showmanship. It was something different, older, sacred. Marlin climbed onto the horse with no drama, no force. Ember shifted once beneath him, then settled. The gate creaked open, and there they went, man and horse, into the open ring. No bucking, no panic, no rage, just movement, slow, purposeful, like they were tracing a memory. In the stands, Emmy sat down slowly. "He's not riding that horse," she whispered. "They're dancing." Cassidy Hayes stood motionless, arms at his sides, face pale. He had trained Ember to be wild, had used him as a trophy of control, and now, that wildness had melted into something else, something no money could command. The horse and the man circled the ring once, then twice. Not a single misstep. No one in the crowd spoke. And somewhere in that stillness, a whisper was born. Not in words, but in feeling, the ghost had returned, and he brought the truth with him. The day after the ride, Ember Ridge was quieter than usual. The dust still floated in the air, but something had changed. People whispered in low voices, not about the wild stallion, but about the old man who had ridden him like they were one. Marlin Graves had come back, not just to ride a horse, but to stir something buried deep beneath the ranch's soil. And now those long-forgotten names and memories were rising with the heat. In town, over lukewarm coffee and under ceiling fans that barely spun, stories spread. Some folks remembered the fire that had taken Marlin's land. Others remembered his wife Clara, a kind woman with soft eyes and a strong voice, who died the same night the barn burned. No one had ever been charged, but questions lingered like smoke in old rafters. Back at the ranch, Cassidy Hayes stood on the porch of his wide, polished house. His boots tapped against the wooden floor, not out of impatience, but worry. He hadn't expected Marlin to come back. He certainly hadn't expected Ember, the stallion he'd bred to be unrideable, to become gentle under the hand of a ghost. Inside, his foreman Warden Croft watched him from the kitchen doorway. Croft had worked for Hayes for nearly 10 years. He knew the man was powerful and dangerous when cornered, but now he saw something else in his boss's eyes. Fear. "You all right?" Croft asked carefully. Hayes didn't look up. "I want to know why he's really here. People don't come back from the dead for a joyride." Meanwhile, Marlin sat alone near the old barn ruins on the edge of the property. He held a rusty horseshoe in his hands, brushing off the ash with his thumb. The barn had collapsed years ago, after the fire. All that remained was a blackened beam and the scent of something lost. His mind wasn't on the fire itself. It was on Clara, and on the years that had passed without her. He remembered her laugh, her strength, and the locket she always wore, a small silver pendant in the shape of a heart. As if summoned by memory, a voice broke the silence. "You still carry ghosts in your pocket?" Marlin turned slowly. There stood Delilah Rowe, gray in her hair now, but her eyes as sharp as ever. She had once been Clara's closest friend. Back then, she and Marlin shared a smile that never quite turned into anything more. After Clara died, Delilah had vanished from his life until now. "Some ghosts don't fit in a pocket," Marlin said with a faint smile. "But yeah, I carry them." Delilah stepped closer. "Why now, Marlin? Why come back after all this time?" He looked toward the stallion in the field. Ember grazed calmly, the fire gone from his eyes. "I didn't remember everything until I saw him," Marlin said softly. "The fire, the land, what was taken." Delilah nodded slowly, her face hardening. "Then you should know the town still believes Cassidy owns this land fair and square. You coming back is going to stir more than just ashes." Across town, in the back room of the local library, Maynard Locke, the oldest man in Dustvale, pulled a worn box from beneath a shelf. He was nearly blind, but his hand still knew what to look for. Inside the box were photos, letters, and an old newspaper clipping dated August 12, 1998. The headline read, "Fire destroys Graves Ranch, 1 dead." Maynard frowned. The body had never been recovered. He had always found that strange. He placed the clipping next to a land transfer deed signed just 2 weeks after the fire, transferring the Graves property to Cassidy Hayes. But the signature at the bottom wasn't Marlin's. It didn't even look like his handwriting. Maynard scratched his beard and muttered, "Names don't lie, but liars love names." At that same moment, Marlin stood in front of the old well behind the barn ruins. As he turned to leave, his boot kicked something buried just under the dirt. He knelt and dug it out gently, a small, scorched tin box. He opened it. Inside was Clara's silver pendant, blackened from fire but still whole. Beneath it were burned corners of letters and a family photo. Clara, Marlin, and a young foal that looked just like Ember. Tears burned in Marlin's eyes. From the tree line, Emmy Hartwell watched. She hadn't meant to follow the old man, but something inside her told her to. She saw the photo and whispered, "That's Ember. Before he was Ember." She ran back to her mother, Reese Hartwell, holding the pendant in her small hands. "Mama, he found something," Emmy said breathlessly. "Something old, something true." Reese took the pendant and froze. She remembered that locket. She had seen it once as a child on Clara's neck. She had never forgotten it. And now, it was back. The past wasn't just returning. It was calling names. And Dustvale was starting to listen. The wind rolled low across Ember Ridge, carrying with it the scent of dry grass and something else. Unspoken truths. The kind that clung to old buildings and whispered through cracks in windows. The kind that didn't stay buried forever. Down, by the town's little archive building, Nora Winthrop, assistant to the mayor, sat hunched over a stack of dusty files. Her hands were smudged with ink, her ponytail falling loose as she flipped through record after record. She wasn't a nosy person by nature, but something about Marlin Graves's return had pulled her curiosity like a magnet. Too many questions. Too many missing answers. She found a file that made her stop cold. It was the property deed for Graves Ranch, dated just days after the fire 25 years ago. Signed, sealed, and transferred to Cassidy Hayes. But something didn't sit right. The signature that read Marlin Graves was shaky and wrong, like someone tried to copy his name and failed just enough for it to feel off. Nora took a breath and copied the document. She had no idea what would come next, but she knew this. The town deserved to know. Meanwhile, across the pasture, Marlin walked alongside Ember, the great stallion's steps matching his own. The horse no longer seemed wild, no longer angry. It was like something had cracked open inside them, both. In his coat pocket, Marlin still carried the burned photo and Clara's pendant. He ran his thumb across the locket now and then like it was a prayer. Back in town, Amos Denby, the former fire chief, sat outside the general store drinking a glass of sweet tea. His hands were thick with calluses, and his eyes didn't miss much. When Nora approached him with the documents, he didn't even blink. "You ever wonder why that fire report was so short?" she asked him quietly. He didn't answer for a long time. Then finally, "I was told to keep it short, told it was a lightning strike even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky." "By who?" she pressed. He looked across the street, toward the big white ranch house at the edge of town. "You already know." That evening, Reese Hartwell sat at her kitchen table, Clara's pendant resting in front of her. Her daughter Emmy leaned on the windowsill, watching the sun melt into the hills. "Was she family?" Emmy asked softly. Reese didn't answer right away. She thought of Clara, her mother's best friend, and the man who vanished the night the flames ate the Graves barn. "She was someone we loved," Reese said finally. "And Marlin, he's not just any old man." Emmy turned to look at her mother. "You mean he's my grandpa?" Reese nodded slowly. Outside, the town was starting to wake up in a different way. People were whispering not about horses now, but about old lies, about fire, about land. At Ember Ridge, Cassidy Hayes paced inside his office. On the wall behind him hung photos of him shaking hands with state officials, posing with blue ribbon, bulls, and smiling at award ceremonies. But tonight the smile was gone. Warden Croft, his longtime foreman, stood nearby, arms crossed. "People are talking, boss," Croft said. "You told me Marlin died in that fire." "I thought he did," Hayes snapped. "He wasn't supposed to survive." Croft took a step closer. "But he did. And now he's stirring up ghosts." Hayes didn't like ghosts. They didn't follow rules. They didn't sign papers or take bribes. They just showed up and told the truth, and the truth didn't burn. Not forever. Later that night, Marlin stood in the ruins of the old barn. Ember stood just behind him, still as a statue. Marlin dropped to one knee and ran his hand over the scorched floorboards. "This is where it ended," he said quietly. "But maybe this is where it begins again." From the shadows, Boone Whitaker stepped forward. He wasn't just Cassidy's hired hand. He was his fixer, the one who cleaned up messes. "You're causing a storm, old man," Boone said. Marlin didn't look up. Truth usually does. Boone shifted. "Hayes won't let this go easy." "I didn't come here for easy," Marlin replied. "I came here to remember and to make sure the truth doesn't die where my wife did." At the edge of the pasture, Emmy sat beside Ember, her small hand resting on his nose. He lowered his head, calm as ever. She whispered, "I think you remember her too, huh, boy?" In town, Nora posted copies of the deed and fire report on the town hall bulletin board. No words, just the papers. Let the people read for themselves, and they did. By morning, the buzz was louder. Something wasn't right, and Cassidy Hayes could feel it. He had built his empire on the ashes of another man's name. But now, the fire was burning backwards, and this time, it was lighting up the truth. The morning after the fire, a strange stillness settled over Ember Ridge. Smoke still curled up from the charred barn, twisting in the sky like a question left unanswered. The townspeople gathered near the wreckage, quiet and shaken. No one spoke of accident anymore. They knew better now. Marlin Graves stood in front of what remained, ashes, burnt beams, and memories. In his hands, he held a rusted tin box he had saved from the flames. Inside it were the broken pieces of a life once stolen, a half-burned letter, 2 melted rings, and a photograph of Clara holding a young colt that looked exactly like Ember. Behind him, Ember stood still, his eyes soft and alert, like he understood this wasn't just a barn, it was a grave, a secret, and now, a beginning. From the crowd, Reese Hartwell stepped forward. Her daughter Emmy trailed close behind, clutching a clean, framed photo Marlin had given her. Clara and the foal, back when things were still whole. "They want to hear from you," Reese said softly. "At the town hall, it's time." Marlin nodded slowly. He hadn't come back to take revenge. He had come back for the truth. And now that the truth had found its voice, he had to use it. That afternoon, the town hall filled with faces. Some familiar, some unsure. They didn't come for a show. They came because they knew the story they'd believed for years was only half of the truth. Some had benefited from the silence. Others had lived uncomfortably with their doubts. When Marlin stepped up to the front, he didn't stand tall. He stood honest. His shoulders were tired, but his voice carried steady. "I didn't come back to break things," he said. "I came back to fix what never should have been broken." He told them everything. About the fire. About Clara. About how Cassidy Hayes had taken the land under false papers while he, Marlin, lay half dead in the woods behind the barn. He spoke not with bitterness, but with clarity, like a man finally allowed to exhale after holding his breath for years. He held up Clara's pendant in the scorched photo. "This," he said, "is all I had left, and now it's enough to tell the truth." The room was quiet. No one interrupted. No one doubted. When he finished, Mayor Trudy Langdon stepped up and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "We can't undo the past," she said, "but we can make sure the truth has a place here again." A week later, Ember Ridge looked different. Not in the fences or the trees, but in the air. Cassidy Hayes had quietly left town 3 days earlier. No goodbyes, no speeches, just gone. His estate stood empty, like a monument to everything built on lies. Marlin's land was returned. The legal process, once slow and full of red tape, had suddenly moved with purpose. Maybe guilt had helped, or maybe truth just moves faster when it's been kept waiting too long. The townspeople gathered again, not to judge but to help. Ramona Carter, the retired schoolteacher, brought nails and planks. Maynard Locke brought a wagon full of hay bales. Even Warden Croft, who had once worked for Hayes, helped rebuild the barn, his silence now a kind of apology. "We rebuild together," Ramona said. "It's time." They named the new barn Clara's Hall. One evening, Marlin sat on the porch of the ranch house. The sun dipped low, painting the fields in gold. Ember grazed nearby, calm and at home. Emmy climbed the porch steps and sat beside him. She handed him the framed photo. "Mama says healing takes time," she said. "Do you think Ember remembers her?" Marlin looked out toward the horse, his eyes warm but distant. "I think he never forgot," he said. "Just like me." Reese joined them, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Marlin and sat quietly beside him. "You think you'll stay this time?" she asked. Marlin took a sip and nodded. "This is where I belong, not as the man I was, but as the man I've become, because of what I lost." Her hand found his, gentle and steady. For the first time in years, they sat without ghosts between them. Just silence, the kind that means something is finally at rest. And in the field, Ember let out a soft breath and lay down in the dirt, peaceful and still. The town of Dustvale had seen fires come and go, but this time, from the ashes, they saw something rise. Truth, healing, and the quiet return of a name long overdue. The ride home wasn't about distance, it was about finally coming back to where the heart belonged.